The 14th of June, 2024, off the southern coast of Hawaii. The sky was clear, the water still. A day that seemed peaceful, uneventful. Mark Jenkins, a marine biologist and diver with over 15 years of experience, was conducting a routine coral reef survey for a conservation project. He dove alone, as usual, equipped with a head-mounted camera, a salinity meter, and a heart open wide to the ocean. At a depth of around 27 meters, Mark's diving light swept across the reef, typically home to schools of clownfish and glowing corals. But today, there was nothing. No fish, no movement, not even a single bubble, not a single sound from a living creature. An eerie silence, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Mark thought to himself, something's not right. He turned his light to the left, and suddenly, a massive shadow drifted past. Unclear in shape. No discernible head or tail, just a dark mass, at least 15 meters long, moving slowly, almost lifelessly, and then it stopped, right in front of Mark. His heart pounded, not out of fear, but because something in those eyes seemed to be waiting. It was a whale, entangled in thick wire, but what made Mark freeze was what wrapped around its body, a tightly coiled metal line cutting deep into the flesh, blood slowly seeping into the water like wisps of red smoke. The whale didn't flee. It remained still, as if it knew the person before it was its last hope. And Mark, in that very moment, knew too. This dive would change his life forever. Before he became the man behind the diving mask that day, Mark Jenkins was just a boy who grew up on the eastern shores of California, where the sea roared against the coast day and night, and the salty wind was thick enough to taste. Mark was born into a family that was, by most accounts, unremarkable. His father repaired boats for a living. His mother sold fish at the local market. They weren't wealthy, well-known, or highly educated, but they taught Mark one thing. Nature doesn't need to be fully understood, only respected. Young Mark would spend hours by the docks, simply watching schools of tiny fish swim beneath the surface, while other kids played video games, raced bikes, or shouted on the sand. Mark quietly picked up drifting trash from the ocean or sketched strange marine creatures from his imagination. Life might have continued that way, if not for one afternoon when he was 11 years old. That day, a whale had stranded itself on shore. News spread quickly. Locals flocked to the beach. Some took photos. Some pointed and laughed. Others live-streamed. But no one did anything. Mark didn't either. He just stood there helpless as the massive creature gasped for breath, its eyes clouded with despair. Eventually, the whale died, on the sand, in front of hundreds of people. Among them, one boy whose heart quietly shattered in two. From that day on, Mark changed. He began learning everything he could about whales, about marine ecosystems, diving equipment, and wildlife conservation programs. No one told him to. No one pushed him. He just felt called by the sea, and he couldn't ignore it again. At 17, Mark became a volunteer at a marine rescue center. He started by scrubbing tanks, sweeping leaves, and preparing turtle food. But over time, the staff began to notice he had something different, a rare patience, a quiet ability to understand animals in distress. Whales can speak, but their eyes never lie, Mark once said in a rare interview before refusing to answer any more questions. He didn't enjoy the spotlight. No social media, no selfies, no viral videos. But anyone who worked with Mark knew if an animal was in trouble, he would be the first to dive in. Over nearly 2 decades, Mark rescued more than 200 marine creatures, turtles tangled in plastic nets, dolphins impaled by glass shards. He once spent 3 hours underwater, freeing a steel ring from the neck of a starving baby seal, and then quietly walked away, leaving others to take the photos, the credit, the sponsorships. To Mark, The most precious reward was when a creature looked back at him one last time before swimming away. No thank you, no applause, just a glance as if to say, "I lived because of you." A former colleague once said he could have stayed on land, doing research, living peacefully, but the moment someone messaged there's an animal in trouble, he was already on the boat, like something was calling him. Mark never married, never had children. His life was bound to the sea, to his old wetsuit, and the hand-drawn maps of marine zones he updated after every dive. People said he was lonely, but Mark never thought so. To him, the ocean was never silent. It breathed at sunset. It whispered in every current. It cried when people bombed fish, dumped garbage, or treated animals like toys. And Mark was one of the rare few who listened. Back to that moment, June of 2024. Mark had completed over 300 survey dives. He thought he'd seen it all. Orphaned calves, bleached coral fields, sharks tangled in wire nets. But he had never seen a marine creature shackled. Because what he was about to cut through wasn't just a trap. It was evidence of a crime beneath the sea. And from that moment on, Mark was no longer just a rescue diver. He became a witness to the pain of a creature who could wait, who could plead for help, and who could forgive. That call from the ocean that day, it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a cry. Clear, powerful, and desperate. Time, 9:17 a.m. Mark had been underwater for over 20 minutes. Sunlight slanted across the surface, shattering into glimmers on his diving mask. At 27 meters deep, light was scarce. Only faint yellow streaks filtered through the cold water, like a thin dream suspended in blue. Originally, Mark had planned to survey an old coral cluster, destroyed by trawling nets 3 years ago. He expected to see signs of recovery, bright patches of new coral, clownfish returning home. But strangely, there was nothing. Just emptiness. A dead zone. A silence so thick, it felt like colorless fog. Mark sensed it, that feeling every seasoned diver knows. Something isn't right. He stopped, held still. No fish sounds, no clicking bubbles, no movement except for the slow current passing over his body like the ocean's faint breath. And then his diving light swept over a dark mass. A massive shadow. Mark flinched, spinning around instinctively, his heartbeat spiked. His first thought, whale shark gentle algae eaters that could grow up to 10 meters long. But within 3 seconds, he knew he was wrong. The creature wasn't swimming. It was orbiting, slowly, like a satellite off course, circling something invisible at the ocean floor. Mark kept his distance, watched, and then he saw its eyes. Huge, dark, flecked with metallic light, like they reflected the entire world. But they held no predatory instinct, no panic. Only one thing, exhaustion. It took him a few seconds to realize this was a fully grown humpback whale, nearly 15 meters long, rugged skin, old scars faded, but new wounds still bleeding. He had never seen a whale come this close to a human. They usually stayed far away, sensitive to the sound of propellers and pressurized tanks. But this one didn't flee. It stayed, and the slow, careful loops it made around Mark felt deliberate. Mark raised his hand gently, just as he would with an injured turtle or dolphin. No reaction. And then the creature changed direction, came closer. Now, only 3 meters away. And that's when he saw it. The thing that made every nerve in his body go taut. A thick metal wire, rusted and sharp, wrapped around the whale's chest and belly. It dug deep into its flesh, coiled tight over its left pectoral fin. Blood seeped into the water, forming a pale red mist, thin as smoke. But the whale still didn't flee. It looked at him, not with instinct, but with thought, with pain, with hope. For the first time in my life, Mark would later say, I felt like a creature, not human, was putting its trust in me. He moved closer, slowly, gently, eyes locked, no sudden movements. When he reached within arm's length, Mark touched the wire. It was sharp, corroded. One end revealed a weld point, as if someone had intentionally fastened it there. This wasn't drifting trash, not tangled fishing net, not an accident. It was a shackle. And in the moment, Mark's hand trembled, feeling that cold metal. The whale didn't flinch. It simply closed its eyes for 3 seconds, as if to say, I leave this to you, please. From that moment on, Mark knew. This wasn't a survey dive anymore. It was a rescue mission. A silent encounter between man and a 20-ton creature begging for help without a sound. One had a voice, the other didn't. But in the depths of the ocean, amidst all the deadly silence, one message rang loud and clear. Please, help me. There were no waves down there, no wind, just one man and one creature, suffering in silence. Two beings, not of the same species, not of the same language yet, understanding one another. Mark stayed still, observing the whale for a few more seconds. He checked his breathing gear. The oxygen level showed about 65% enough for a close approach. He edged forward, unclipped a specialized diving knife from his belt. Short, thin, razor sharp, designed for cutting nets, cables, or for emergencies. The whale remained still, as if it understood if it thrashed, it might scare the human away. And if that human left, there'd be no one else. Mark carefully touched the wire cutting into the whale's belly. When he gently lifted it, the skin split. A small tear blood surged in a dark red stream through the cold water. He flinched, but the whale didn't move, didn't jerk, didn't cry, didn't slap its tail. It just opened its eyes and looked at him, a look that pierced straight into the heart. Not in pain, not angry, just resigned. That look made me feel ashamed to be human, Mark later said. We are smart, we dominate, and because of that, we think we have the right to harm creatures who can't speak back. Mark began examining the full extent of the injury. The wire wasn't a single loop, it was a system. A spiral of steel bands wrapping around the whale's torso, cutting deep into the blubber and muscle, forming swollen, infected grooves. But what chilled Mark the most was the metal cylinder, about 40 centimeters long, embedded between two of the coils, just beneath the whale's belly. This wasn't drift trash, not random ocean waste. It was welded to the wire, fixed, lockable, etched with codes. Mark held his breath. This was a man-made device, perhaps a tracker, a monitoring sensor, or worse, an implanted module for biological study or remote control. He swept his light toward the whale's left fin, the tightest wound. The flesh was nearly worn down to the bone, with clear signs of infection. This thing hadn't been attached recently. It had been there for a long time. Months? Maybe years? That silence from the whale was the kind that comes only after suffering for too long. It no longer cried, no longer resisted. It just waited for a miracle. And Mark knew he couldn't cut the entire structure at that depth. Not safe, not enough air, not enough tools. He decided to do the only thing he could at that moment. Free the deepest loop, the one suffocating the whale. He carefully slid his knife between the coils. Cut, bit by bit. Blood seeped again, but this time, Mark saw the skin begin to release. The flesh deflated slightly, as if the whale had just been pulled from a torturous vice. And then, something strange happened. When he cut the third coil, the metal cylinder lit up. A blinking blue light, like a sensor being triggered. Mark panicked. He backed away slightly, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the device. The light blinked for 10 seconds, then stopped. The whale stayed still. At that moment, I had no idea what I'd just activated. I didn't know what that device was, or where it came from. I only knew what I touched didn't belong to the ocean. Mark surfaced, his hand gripping a tether tied to a floating buoy. Waves tapped lightly against his mask as he pulled a waterproof radio from the shoulder pouch. He called the nearest observation station. His voice was urgent. "I need a full extraction kit, high grade, bring biopsy clamps, and an endoscopic camera if you have one. This isn't an animal rescue. This is a bomb removal." No one asked questions. They heard Mark's voice, and they understood this was serious. Less than 40 minutes later, a speedboat arrived. Mark changed out his oxygen tank, checked his tools, and took the necessary instruments. A colleague offered to join. Mark shook his head. "Just me. If it trusts me, I don't want to scare it." Second dive of the day. Colder, darker, far more dangerous. He didn't have to look far. The whale was still there. It hadn't swum away, hadn't hidden. It was waiting in the exact same spot where Mark had first cut the wire. This time, Mark approached quickly. No hesitation, no need to test its reaction. The whale remained still, as if it had accepted what was about to happen. Mark drew a serrated knife, sharper, more precise. Left hand, surgical clamp for underwater use. Right hand, the blade. He began cutting from the pectoral fin, the area most tightly bound. One wrong move, and the blade could slice into muscle. Blood, panic, a lost chance. Each cut was a gamble, and as he worked, Mark whispered, "It's okay, hang in there, I'm going to get this off you." He didn't know why he spoke to the whale. Maybe for his own comfort. Maybe because, deep down, he believed it understood. Minute by minute, the rescue continued. 15 minutes passed. 2 coils were cut, one around the belly, one near the dorsal fin. The whale began to shift gently, like a quiet sigh of relief. But it didn't leave. That's when I realized it wasn't just in pain. It had become used to pain. What it truly wanted was release. The hardest part remained, the cylindrical device. It lay at the center of the belly, buried under tissue, locked between 2 tightened loops. Mark inhaled. Oxygen level, under 40%. Time was running out. He reached in with the clamp, working on the tiny fasteners, screws, maybe pins. Every twist triggered a faint blue glow from the device. Sensors, confirming tampering. And in his mind, one thought echoed. Maybe this is a tracker. Maybe someone's watching it. Or maybe they're watching me. His hand trembled, not from cold, but from the terrifying awareness that something unnatural had been inside this wild creature all this time. Finally, after more than 30 minutes of work, the device came loose. It slid free from the tissue. Mark grabbed it with his left hand, didn't let go. Then swiftly cut the last 2 steel loops. The bleeding slowed, but now every groove, every scar, every wound that had been hidden for years was laid bare. I didn't cry then, but it felt like someone was squeezing my heart. These creatures don't scream. They don't write news stories. They don't go online to accuse. They just stay silent. Mark backed away, careful not to cause alarm. The whale turned, slowly, then tilted upward, rising toward the surface, as if reaching for a breath it hadn't truly taken in years. Mark followed. His tank read less than 10% oxygen. He pulled off his mask just in time. And then the whale breached. It burst through the surface. Its full body launched into the air, like a celebration, a release, a cry of freedom. Water exploded. Waves slammed into the nearby boat. Mark stared, stunned. The creature had just been wounded, scarred, stripped of metal, and still it jumped, as if to say, "Thank you." I've never been thanked like that in my life. No handshake has ever made me shake like that. What Mark brought back to the boat that day wasn't just a device. It was a secret, a question about humanity, the sea, and the boundaries of our morality. Back on the small boat, Mark sat in silence. The afternoon sun blazed across the sea, turning everything golden, but his skin felt cold. Not from the water, not from the wind, but from what he now held in his hand, a metal device he had just removed from a living creature. It wasn't large, roughly the length of a human forearm, cylindrical, about 40 centimeters long, weighing close to 4 kilograms, pale gray, with areas eroded by years of saltwater exposure. But what froze Mark in place was a faint engraving on the outer casing, Nordex, MK2, vertical bar, external observation, module vertical bar, XP, Project 472, and below it, property of Nordex Marine Systems. The name wasn't unfamiliar. One of the largest private marine technology corporations in the North Atlantic, specialized in sonar, underwater navigation systems, and with rumored ties to military research projects. Mark's hands trembled. Why was a device from a military tech company embedded inside a wild whale? Who authorized this? And worse, how many other whales were carrying similar devices? Mark rushed to the cabin, opened his waterproof laptop, connected the device to a reader port. Lines of encrypted code flooded the screen. Most of it was AES encrypted, impossible to decode without proprietary software. But one file, just one, was left unlocked. Data stream timestamp, a log of transmitted signals. And the first line made Mark's heart stop. Initial activation, August 3rd, 2017. Location, Southern Japan Trench. 2017. The device had been active since that year, which meant the whale had carried it for nearly 7 years. Mark, stared at the screen, stunned. 7 years. In that time, the whale had likely traveled thousands of kilometers across the Pacific Ocean, drifting all the way to Hawaii, alive, but never truly free. No one knew, no one saw, no one had ever asked, why does this whale have such deep scars? Mark clenched his jaw. A fury rose in him, not just for the whale, but for the cold, silent indifference of a species that prided itself on intelligence, yet looked away from the suffering of another. He sent the raw data to an old friend, a marine biologist who once worked with NOAA. A few hours later, the reply came. This is a behavioral monitoring module. Includes a microphone, GPS chip, thermal sensors, and a blood sample extractor. But the way it was attached is illegal. This type of device should have been mounted externally, temporarily. But this one was welded into tissue, deliberately, strategically, and worse. This is a prototype model designed for long-range tracking, which means this whale wasn't the only one. That's when I realized I hadn't just cut a metal chain. I had unlocked a door to a truth someone wanted buried. Mark didn't upload the video. He didn't post it for views. Instead, he sent a full report to Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd, and National Geographic. Within a week, the story sparked an official investigation. A marine patrol team scanned waters around Hawaii and found 2 other whales, both showing signs of embedded metal devices. They couldn't get close enough to confirm, but the pattern was already too loud to ignore. Nordex Marine Systems, when questioned, denied everything. We have no ongoing biological projects in the Pacific, but the evidence, the engraved device in Mark's hand, was a thunderous rebuttal to that lie. I never thought of myself as a hero, Mark later said. I just think I was one of the very few people that whale chose to give a second chance. Within a month, the ripples grew into waves. International news outlets ran headline after headline. Devices found inside whale. Has humanity gone too far? The diver who rescued the deep silence. 7 years without a sound, a whale speaks through its eyes. On social media, the footage Mark recorded was shared endlessly. But he wasn't the one who posted it. His friend, the one who helped decrypt the data, couldn't hold it in. The clip was uploaded with a single caption: "You don't need human words to ask for help. Sometimes, just eyes that wait long enough for someone to listen." The video went viral faster than any TED Talk. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. And most surprising of all was the shift in tone from apathy to empathy. Whales can't speak, but their eyes scream louder than words ever could. Elementary school kids began drawing pictures of the whale and the diver. An independent film crew began working on a documentary titled, "If You Carry Silent Pain, the Ocean Will Be Your Ally." A nonprofit launched a campaign, Remove the Chain, calling for investigation into unauthorized tagging of marine animals, especially in regions with little international oversight. Mark was invited to speak at the Global TED Conference. The invitation read, "You don't need to be eloquent, just show up. Your silence is enough for us to understand." But Mark declined. "I don't want applause for telling this story. I tell it because I don't want people to forget." Back home in his quiet seaside cabin, the one where he had lived for over a decade without fame or recognition, things began to change. Neighbors came by, not for autographs, but to ask, "Do you think the turtles in the next bay might be caught in something too? How can we teach our kids not to throw fishing lines into the water? Mark, if something like this ever happens again, could we help next time?" Mark smiled. He didn't say much, just unrolled a map of the reef, marked with red circles at places worth checking again. Change doesn't begin with big organizations. It starts when people stop ignoring a creature suffering in silence. Greenpeace invited Mark to consult on a Pacific whale monitoring mission. Sea Shepherd mailed him a handwritten letter offering him a spot on a 3-month patrol voyage. A documentary team from Iceland sent him a brand new full-face dive suit engraved with, "To the man who hears what the sea cannot say." Mark kept the suit, but donated the rest: awards, gifts, even funding, to an unnamed marine rescue fund. The same kind of place where people like him once started scrubbing tanks, untangling nets, picking up trash. One night, while standing alone on the shore, the moonlight painting a silver trail across the ocean, Mark saw a shadow, a massive one. It surfaced, then sank again. Far off. No noise, no show, just a creature returning. Mark held his breath. He knew it was her. The humpback whale no longer bound by metal. No wires, no blood, no blinking lights from a device that never belonged in the sea. Just the ocean and freedom. People ask me, do whales know how to say thank you? I'm not sure, but I know that when I think of that sunset, when she rose once more, I cried. People often think that when a creature is rescued, the story ends. But in truth, that's when it finally begins to live. And for Mark, life after that day was never the same. He was no longer the anonymous diver in a worn wetsuit. Even without news appearances, without interviews, without a single live stream, his name was now whispered in ecology classrooms, in ethical debates about biological research, and in quiet conversations among coastal fishing villages, places where people once thought nothing existed beneath the surface. Mark continued living by the sea. Quiet mornings, coffee brewed early, wiping down his old diving mask, adjusting oxygen hoses, adding new notations to his hand-drawn reef maps, marking spots where the ocean might still hold something unspoken. But one thing had changed, something that would never go back to the way it was. His heart. I used to think I saved that whale, but then I realized it saved me. From indifference, from numbness, From that quiet voice in my head whispering, what can one person possibly change? They say the ocean is where life began. Perhaps that's why when standing before it, we feel small, not because of its size, but because of its gentle vastness. That whale never screamed, never fought back, never retaliated against the thing forced into its body. It simply kept swimming, enduring, waiting however faint the chance for a moment of release. And in that silence, Mark arrived. Not as a savior, but as someone willing to look pain in the eye and not turn away. I used to think that changing the world required something enormous, but now I know sometimes it only takes one thing: not walking away when a living being is hurting, just daring to dive deeper than your fear. Months later, international organizations began rewriting marine research protocols. Any device placed on animals now required full disclosure, transparent registration, and a clear removal plan. Several corporations were forced to suspend their projects or shift to less invasive methods. No, the world didn't change overnight, but at least people started asking the right questions. When did we decide we had the right to attach things to a living body just to learn from it? Is knowledge gained through suffering a price too cruel to pay? We can't give the whale back the 7 years it lost, but maybe, just maybe, we can ensure no other whale must carry chains beneath the sea ever again. Mark never saw her again, but he believed she was still out there, somewhere far offshore, drifting through quiet currents, no longer being cut open by metal that should have never touched the wild. Sometimes, on stormy nights while sitting on his porch, Mark said he could hear the waves differently, not just crashing, but beating, steady, slow, like the pulse of the ocean. And each time, he'd close his eyes and smile, as if waiting for someone to rise through the white fog of the water. Not to say thank you, just to say, I'm still here, free, and finally, fully alive. Let this story not end in tears. Let it linger in us so that one day, when we see a creature caught in trash, a bird covered in oil, a dog left behind, or even a stranger needing help, we don't look away. We do what's right. Even if it's small, even if it's silent, even if no one notices. Because sometimes, it is those quiet, unseen actions that become the loudest whispers the ocean has ever heard.